do you track your macros when you're trying to build muscle?
Yeah, myself, I usually just track macros year round. It doesn't really bother me much. But like even with clients, we'll at least track like some of the basics, right? Depending on the client, whether that be like let's calorie target, calorie range with maybe like a protein minimum and fruit and vegetable minimum to have some food quality control there. Maybe, carbs around your workout, things like that. But like, at least something, some way of tracking, because for a lot of people, you're probably not going to gain if you're just eating without tracking, or you see the other extreme where somebody like says, okay, well, I'm quote unquote bulking now. I feel like that word's made a comeback in recent years, and they use that as an excuse to eat everything and gain way too fast. I think, having some sort of target, even if it's just calories with a protein, fruit, and vegetable minimum or something like that, having something to track is probably better than not, because if you're not gaining, it's going to be hard to adjust if you're all over the place and not tracking anything. Like, how are you going to know what to change or how much to change?
Right. That's a great point, because I've even been guilty of that, where I either gain too quickly, especially if you're someone who's more susceptible to eating. Now, I'm not saying this is me, but if you are someone like this, where you're more susceptible to eating processed foods,
Yeah. Oh, you can
that
put down a lot of calories fast. Yeah.
yeah, and it can also influence how your physique is looking. So
Yeah.
there's just a bunch of things there that need to be considered. But how on earth are you going to gain weight in this methodical fashion like you're mentioning if you don't track, if you don't have some form of tracking going on, even if it's a meal plan? Like, okay, you know you're going to eat this daily, and if you substitute it, you have an idea that there's an how do you say this? The calories are equated, right? Or the
Yeah.
carbs are equated. Like,
Yep.
okay, I'm going to sub my oats for some sweet potatoes. Okay, but you know that if you do that sub on that day, it's going to be a similar amount of carbohydrates, for example,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And then you can at least, even if you're on a set meal plan, you can add more. Like, hey, I'm not gaining. I can add more. Or, hey, I'm gaining too quickly. I can pull back. Yeah. Without some sort of structure and some sort of tracking, it's really hard to know. You know what I mean? Like what
yes.
you're doing, and how do you adjust that? And I oftentimes, have people say, meal plans versus macros. And I honestly think somewhere probably in the middle of the two is
Hmm.
probably the best approach. Like, I don't think it needs to be the same food at the same time of day every single day for 12 weeks of prep or whatever. Like, I think that's a bad approach. You're probably going to have some nutrient deficiencies and it's going to be hard to stay consistent. But I think having some staples like, hey, I eat usually around these times of day. These are the types of foods I generally have at each of these meals. And then having the freedom to be able to swap out different fruits and vegetables or different protein sources or starchy carb sources or whatever. But like having some structure your day, so it isn't just like, hey, this day I ate 2 meals to hit my macros, and this day I spread it out in 6 meals, and this day I ran out of protein, so I just ate a bunch of carbs the second half of my day. And I think having some structure is probably, you know what I mean, and somewhere between
Yes.
is probably best. It should, it doesn't have to be same thing, same time every day for weeks on end. That's probably not best either, but just some structure that you can be flexible with, within.
Yes, 100%. And also, if you're someone who is, the right way I'm looking to say this is, you're afraid to put on fat, let's just
Yeah.
say, right? And your
Yeah.
goal is muscle growth. Well, then
Yeah.
you better do some form of tracking, because then you might actually never put on any weight at
Anything. Yeah.
all, which is, again, if you're not the genetic elite, like if you're not on this, if you're not one of the probably guests on this podcast, and I've even had guests on the podcast who are not genetic elites, but just as an
Yeah.
example, right? A David K, and he might have disagreed with me when I say these things, but this is the exception, not the rule. Not everybody can do that and thrive on that. Like if I did that, if I try to stay that lean, like there'd be no way I'm putting on any muscle like that. I've tried it. Just does, like my physique doesn't change at all. And
Yeah.
my lifts don't go up at all. So I've done it for long periods too. So you can't even be like, well, you just didn't give it enough time. You didn't put it to work long enough. No, I have. So
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, it's awful hard for someone who's trying to stay the same weight to be gaining muscle, losing fat simultaneously, especially if that person is natural and has been training for a while. And I can think of just several people I know, like not clients, but like people I've never worked with, but just people I know from gyms and stuff over the years. And you think of how they're always saying they're never getting anywhere, their strength's always the same and whatever. And it's because they're afraid to gain weight, and the scale goes up 3 to 5 pounds, and they're trying to cut again right away. And
Yes.
It's like, okay, you got to give this a little more time. Like, you can't just be cutting every time you turn around. I mean, that's not going to result in growth or progress. I've seen people who have taken, 2-year off seasons between shows, and they've done a poor job of controlling gain. So they gain quick and then they're always cutting. And every time you
Ah,
talk to them during your off season, they're cutting. And now they start prep, and it's like, well, you just spent most of your off season just gaining fast and cutting, and a lot of the time was just spent cutting. Like, that's not setting you up for a successful prep. Like, you're probably not in the greatest spot metabolically, hormonally, and you're also probably not, you probably haven't gained much, or not nearly what you could have if you stayed out of a deficit most of the time. And so, I mean, you see that all the time with people. I think that bodybuilding attracts people like, extreme personalities, right? And so, because you see both extremes, you see the people who stay way too close to stage lean, or maybe they gain back to a sustainable place, but they try to stay too close and don't let their weight drift up. And then you have the other extreme where they
get sloppy.
it's, yeah, they're 50, 60 pounds over stage weight, and I totally understand. I have worked with clients who can be 10 or 15 over and be healthy and labs look
Thrive.
normal and that. And I have others, I've worked with women who have needed to be 25 to 30 over to have a normal menstrual cycle. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there are ranges, but I've yet to see someone who needs to be 60 pounds over stage weight to be healthy.
Okay, now we're kind of entering the intermediate stage. Okay,
Yep.
let's just call it. They've been lifting, they've had the newbie gains, they've been lifting for 2 years, 1 to 2 years. Now the rate of progress is going to start to slow down a little bit, right?
Yes.
Okay, so what do you need to consider in order to keep that moving forward again from a nutrition standpoint? I mean, I've pushed the scale, right? Like, we've all been guilty of that, where you push the scale and